Today I'm going to talk about, in the third person, the idea of it, the concept behind it, and I'm going to expand a little bit upon what I talked about in my last video. In my last video, I used the idea of zooming out. So you're zooming out into the third person, you're the observer, and I split myself up into kind of two parts, which was to view myself as a child and then as this drinker version of myself, just to give me perspective, and so that I could sort of remember that there was a time in my life where alcohol had nothing to do with me, and I existed before it. So that was a good sort of early step of using this process to kind of break things down a little bit and open your mind and get used to viewing yourself in different ways. So today I want to talk about another way in which we can do that. It's quite a simple one, and I think it's probably likely to resonate with a lot of people. And then I want to talk a little bit about how, when you're doing that, you can kind of break things down inside of that idea. So the idea today is I'm going to talk about the third person. So we're zooming out and we're now the observer, and just simply looking at yourself as a drinker and yourself as a non-drinker. Now, depending on where you are on that pathway, it may be that you've already quit and that you're just looking for some guidance and help. It may be that you're still drinking and you're just curious. But either way, you're probably very likely to be able to see that there are almost like two sides to your personality, one the non-drinker and one the drinker. And we can often find that when the drinker kind of is allowed to be in control, things sometimes can go off course a little bit. We can sometimes quite drastically, but I think it's probably in most people's experience that there's this kind of form of duality where those two sides of yourself can be in conflict. On the one hand, you have the drinker that is quite short-term thinking, isn't really thinking about the consequences, and can therefore often steer us a little bit further away from kind of where we're hoping to go in life, and they can make some sort of poor decisions, and ironically it's then the sober version of yourself that then often has to kind of pick up the pieces and deal with the hangover. But it's, in most people's experience, they will be able to see themselves as almost like there are two people, that kind of one is in control sometimes and the other is in control another time. In situations like, you might wake up in the morning and think, I'm not going to drink today. I feel like, yeah, I'm in control, I'm not going to drink today. I don't feel like I'm going to do that today. But then the day wears on and maybe anxiety builds a little bit, or you just get a bit of stress from work or stress from life. You get a bit tired, and then as things progress through the day, you might find that the drinker suggests, well, we could have a drink actually, and then you end up doing it. And sometimes you feel like you've kind of let yourself down in some way, because you'd intended not to, but then you did. And it can work the same way with, say, if you go out on a night out, or go out in a situation where there's going to be alcohol, and you try and set yourself a kind of a rigid boundary of how many drinks you're going to have. Say you're going to say, I'll have, like, I'm only going to have two or maybe three, or whatever your kind of, whatever your limit would be, a reasonable limit where you think that's okay. But then after the first drink, maybe the second drink, something takes over, the drinker takes over, and before you know it, you're having far more than you intended to. And again, it's this feeling of like you can't trust yourself fully to follow through with what you actually wanted. Now, I think maybe there's a mistake that can be made where you can look at it like, almost like it's like your conscience, like a good and evil. You've got a voice on either side, one's good and one's bad. It's understandable for that to happen, but I'm not sure it's entirely helpful, because what you really need to do is be able to view these two sides of yourself both with compassion and the understanding that they are both looking out for your best interests. Now, it's easy to look at the non-drinker as somebody who's looking out for you, because generally they will tend to be the ones that are future focused and, you know, want health, mental health, want to be able to save money. They want things to be in balance. They want to be in control, and it's obvious that that person is looking out for you. Maybe not quite so easy to understand why the drinker is actually looking out for you, because they can often derail you quite seriously. So you almost feel like sometimes like they're out to get you. You know, you've got this side of yourself that takes over and sabotages and kind of ruins everything. But actually that version of yourself is trying to protect you. So if you imagine them as having a conversation, the non-drinker would say, look, I don't want to drink because it often leads to one too many. I drink more than I want to. It can sometimes lead to me staying up much later than I want to. It can often affect sleep in a negative way. I will have a hangover. I'll probably be more tired the next day and groggy. I've got things I need to do tomorrow and I don't want to do all of that. But then the drinker's saying, but we need to relax. We need to relax. And the problem is, you don't know how to relax. So I'm going to do it with alcohol. Like, you don't know how to do it. You don't know how to relax. So I have to do it for us. So when you think about it like that, both people would like to relax, but the non-drinker doesn't really have the tools at their disposal to be able to do that. The only thing that they really know is alcohol, and so the drinker side of your personality will take over and use whatever tools it has, because that's all that's available. So looking at those two versions of yourself like that just enables you to be able to see that what really needs to happen here is not to vilify the sort of not the drinker version of yourself, or to live with this kind of constant conflict of having two sides of your personality trying to take control. You know, that's what's called cognitive dissonance, is having two opposing ideas running simultaneously. It leaves you feeling confused and it's exhausting. I found that really powerful when I really looked at myself. Instead of having this kind of like battle of good and evil going on, I just thought, well, hold on, what this really comes down to is I don't know how to relax. I haven't learned how to do that. And if you're somebody that has been drinking a long time or has been using it in that way for some time, each time you drink, you're robbing yourself really of the opportunity to learn how to do it properly. And so the job that you have then is to try and figure out, well, what can I do to relax? How I need to learn how to do it. And so that's one of the things I started doing, is looking into meditation, looking into mindfulness, looking into certain hobbies. I've got back into things that I didn't used to do, that I'd kind of forgotten about. And I found new ways, you know, with breathing techniques to relax my body. So we'll wrap things up there today. I don't want to go on too long. I've got plenty of other things that I would like to talk about, but we'll bring them up in future videos. And please do hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and stick around, because as I've said, I've got a lot more to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the next ones already.